Number 8. Richard Beasley. 48-year-old Scott Davis was thrilled to score a job as a live-in caretaker at a rural farm in Ohio in 2011. He made plans to move to the area from South Carolina to be near his ailing mother. He scored the gig through a Craigslist ad, which listed to pay at $300 per week and claimed to include free housing on the property. The ad specifically sought an older person who was preferably single. Davis packed up his belongings and drove to the remote site to meet his new boss, who called himself Jack and who had a younger man with him. Out of nowhere, one of the men shot Davis through the elbow. Davis ran for his life and hid in the wilderness for the next 7 hours before approaching a house and asking the owner to dial 911. As news of the crime spread, a woman contacted the police and said that her brother, David Pauly, had responded to a similar Craigslist ad months earlier. He went missing after driving to Ohio to start the job. Pauly's murdered remains were found in the same woods, where an attempt was made on Davis's life, along with the body of a third victim who was identified as Richard Geiger. There was also a fourth victim, Timothy Kern, whose body was found behind a mall. Police determined that the Craigslist ads were crafted with the specific intention of luring single middle-aged men who were down on their luck to their deaths. The only possible motive investigators could come up with was a desire to kill for fun. Detectives traced the Craigslist ads and zeroed in on 52-year-old Richard Beasley as their prime suspect. He was convicted of a slew of charges and was sentenced to death in 2013. Beasley's young accomplice, Brogan Rafferty, was convicted of 3 counts of aggravated murder and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Number 7. DEUNDREA Holloway. 22-year-old Lise Dodd was 8 months pregnant with her first child when her decapitated body was found inside her Alton, Illinois apartment in 2022. The young woman's mother made the gruesome discovery. Police found Lisa's severed head in a garbage dumpster outside. Lisa's family was planning to throw her a surprise baby shower when they suddenly found themselves preparing for her funeral. They had bought gifts for the baby and sent out invitations, and they were looking forward to the start of a new chapter in Lisa's life. Suspicion quickly fell on her ex-boyfriend, DEUNDREA Holloway, who wasn't the baby's father. The pair had dated off and on for 2 years, and the relationship was contentious, leading Lisa's mother, Heidi Noel, to frequently check on her daughter. Heidi hadn't heard from Lise in a while, so she went to check on her. Holloway was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, intentional homicide to an unborn child, dismembering a human body, concealment of a homicide, and a motor vehicle-related charge. A court-appointed psychiatrist found him unfit to stand trial, but predicted that the suspect will become fit within a year of receiving proper mental health treatment. For now, the disturbing case remains at a standstill. Number 6. Andrew URDIALES. Andrew URDIALES was a U.S. Marine stationed at Camp Pendleton in California when he committed his first murder in 1986. He stalked 23-year-old college student Robin Brandley and stabbed her 41 times in Mission Viejo. 2 years later, in 1988, URDIALES fatally shot 29-year-old Julie McGee and dumped her body in a ditch. His next murder came 2 months later in San Diego, where he killed 31-year-old Mary Ann Wells and discarded her remains in an abandoned warehouse. The serial slayer's 5th murder happened in 1989, when he left 18-year-old Tammy Irwin's body in the streets of Palm Springs. URDIALES managed to fly under the radar long enough to be honorably discharged from the military in 1991. The following year, he kidnapped a nurse named Jennifer Asbenson, who became his first and only victim to escape. Asbenson opened the trunk of her kidnapper's car from the inside and ran for her life in the remote desert while he chased her with a machete. A truck driver picked her up and took her to the police, but none of the information she gave them led them any closer to the killer at the time. In fact, detectives had yet to connect the murders and realized they had a serial killer on their hands. URDIALES laid low for the next 3 years and continued to evade suspicion for his crimes. He resumed his years-long murder spree in 1995 when he killed 32-year-old Denise Maney in the California desert. His last 3 homicides happened in Illinois and Indiana in 1996. Police became suspicious of URDIALES the following year and seized his gun to determine if it matched evidence from some of the crime scenes. During questioning, he confessed to every single murder. He never offered a rational motive beyond the fact that he seemed to hate women. URDIALES was first tried in Illinois, where he received a death sentence. When the state governor commuted his sentence to life in prison, prosecutors in California sought to have him extradited so they could try him for his crimes there and seek the death penalty. He was convicted of 5 murders in California and was sentenced to death in 2018. URDIALES took his own life in his prison cell less than a month later. Number 5. Robert Joe Long. Starting in 1981, Bobby Joe Long lured dozens of women into private settings and brutally attacked them. He allegedly targeted around 50 victims through classified ads before he was convicted of just one of the attacks in 1981. Long was granted a new trial, and the case was thrown out. Over an 8-month period in 1984, he abducted, assaulted, and murdered at least 10 women in the Tampa Bay area. At the time, Long was on probation for a previous assault case, but he managed to go undetected as he carried out his campaign of terror. He targeted vulnerable women who were alone, including prostitutes, and killed them by either strangling them, cutting their throat, or bludgeoning them to death. Toward the end of Long's killing spree, he abducted a young woman named Lisa McVeigh with the intention to kill her. McVeigh pretended to care about her captor and played on his sympathies by telling him that she was the only child of a severely ill mother. In the meantime, Lisa left as many fingerprints as she possibly could throughout his home, so there would be evidence at the scene. She persuaded Long to release her and provided police with critical information that led to his identification and capture. He eventually confessed to all the murders and received 28 life sentences, 4 99-year sentences, and 1 death sentence. Long sat on death row for more than 30 years before Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed his death warrant in 2019. He offered no final words in the moments before his execution at the age of 65. Number 4. Stephen Supple. Stephen Supple and his wife Cheryl were devout Catholics and highly esteemed members of their community in Iowa City, Iowa. After marrying in 1990, they adopted 4 children from Korea. The family attended church weekly and, by all appearances, lived a wholesome and morally upstanding lifestyle. Cheryl had no idea that her husband committed serious financial crimes until he was indicted in 2008 for embezzlement and money laundering. The bank Stephen worked for was accusing him of stealing over $559,000 over a 7-year period. He lost his job, and Cheryl returned to work to support the family. Stephen was awaiting trial when he dialed 911 one morning and said that the police needed to go to his home immediately. He wasn't there when officers arrived, but they found the rest of the family dead from blunt force trauma. There was a handwritten confession left behind by Stephen, along with several answering machine messages detailing his activities after he committed the murders. He offered no specific motive for the killings, but all signs point toward his impending prison time and his failure to financially support his family as major contributing factors. 5 minutes after dialing 911 and summoning police to his home, Stephen took his own life by crashing his minivan into a telephone pole. Number 3. SHAWN GRATE. Police in Ashland, Ohio received a terrifying call in 2016 from a woman who said she was just feet away from her sleeping kidnapper. She had been held captive in an abandoned house for 3 days, didn't know the address, had been brutalized repeatedly, and was afraid to try escaping. Thankfully, police figured out where the house was and rescued her. The woman's abductor, SHAWN GRATE, was a serial grifter with a history of erratic behavior and a lengthy past of abusing and living off women. GRATE met his kidnapping victim at a local community center and gained her trust over a long period before inviting her over and refusing to let her leave. He initially tried convincing the police that the victim was with him willingly, but he began admitting to bits and pieces of the truth when it became clear that there was no way the police were going to believe him. While searching the abandoned home, police found the decomposing bodies of two missing women, Stacey Stanley and Elizabeth Griffith. Under intense questioning, Grate admitted to killing the women and confessed to 3 other murders that took place between 2006 and 2016. He targeted vulnerable victims with deceptive charm and didn't need much of a reason to kill them. In one case, he murdered a woman because he thought she had stolen $4 from him at a bar. Grate was convicted of all 5 of the murders he confessed to. He received several life sentences and was sentenced to death and is scheduled to be executed in 2025. But Ohio banned lethal injection in 2020 and doesn't allow any other methods of capital punishment, leaving Grate's future uncertain. Number 2. Tim BOCZKOWSKI. On November 4, 1990, 911 dispatchers in Greensboro, North Carolina received a call from 34-year-old Tim BOCZKOWSKI, who reported finding his wife, Elaine, unresponsive in their bathtub. By the time first responders arrived, it was too late to save her life. Tim told investigators that Elaine was a heavy drinker and made her death sound like an accident, but there were several obvious red flags at the scene. There was no noticeable smell of alcohol, and the tub was completely dry. While awaiting autopsy reports, detectives discovered that Tim's business and marriage were both failing, and he was in dire financial straits. The autopsy confirmed that there was no alcohol in Elaine's system, and her lungs showed no clear evidence of being underwater like Tim had claimed. Her cause of death was ruled undetermined, and the investigation stopped there. Tim collected a $25,000 life insurance payout, packed up his 3 kids and moved to Pittsburgh, where he remarried in 1994. Later that year, he dialed 911 and reported finding his wife, Mary Ann, unresponsive in their hot tub. By the time police arrived, Mary Ann was dead. The alleged tragedy was eerily similar to Elaine's death. Tim described Mary Ann as a heavy drinker, but there were no signs of alcohol consumption at the scene. He also had suspicious scratches on his neck, which looked like defensive wounds, and failed a polygraph. Authorities had to wait for autopsy results before they could charge Tim with murder. During that time, he collected on a $100,000 life insurance policy he had taken out on Mary Ann and paid for with money they received as wedding gifts. Mary Ann's autopsy ruled that she was strangled to death, and Tim was charged with murder in Pennsylvania, prompting investigators in North Carolina to take a second look at Elaine's death. He was convicted of murder in both states and is serving life without parole. Number 1. Edward Wayne Edwards. Edward Wayne Edwards became a habitual criminal at a very young age. He spent time in juvenile detention and was dishonorably discharged from the military, making it clear early on that he had a problem with authority and following rules. In 1955, he escaped from jail while serving time for a break-in. For the next several years, he became a drifter and made a living robbing gas stations across the U.S. The FBI added Edwards to its 10 most wanted list in 1961. He was captured the following year and was paroled in 1967. Edwards claimed to be reformed and became a motivational speaker, but eventually went back to crime, committing arsons, armed burglaries, and other violent acts, and often getting away with it. He was always on the move, living under various aliases as he carted his wife and 5 kids from place to place. The family lived in more than a dozen states between 1974 and 2009, when Edwards' DNA was connected to a double murder in Wisconsin. One of his adult children had tipped off law enforcement to his possible involvement in the crime after discovering evidence during their efforts to understand their bizarre upbringing. By then, Edwards was 76 years old. The double homicide, known as the Sweetheart Murders, happened back in 1980, nearly 30 years earlier, when couple Tim Hack and Kelly Drew vanished from a wedding reception. Their decomposing bodies were found 2 months later, and the medical examiner ruled that they had been stabbed and strangled. Investigators connected Edwards with 5 homicides that took place between 1977 and 1996, including the Sweetheart Murders and 3 others in Ohio. In some cases, his motive was financial, but his reasons for committing some of the murders are unclear. When asked if he enjoyed killing, he said, "Of course not. but that you sometimes have to do what you have to do. To this day, authorities suspect that he's responsible for additional killings that he was never definitively connected to. Edwards was convicted of all 5 of the murders he was tried for and was sentenced to death in Ohio, but he died on death row in 2011 from natural causes. Thanks for watching. Would you rather live next door to someone who seems ordinary and friendly but has connections to multiple suspicious disappearances, or a group of people who perform strange rituals in their backyard but don't seem to be breaking any laws? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you soon. Bye.